Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Michael Zuber, one rental at a time, back with his Thursday guest, Mr. Jonathan Twomley. How you doing, sir?
I'm well, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing very well. So, I've been studying the consumer, have an econ degree, been studying the economy for 30 plus years. I understand what a recession is. I understand how to invest in them. Kind of was prepared for the Great Recession, moved assets around and survived it quite well. But I got to tell you, I think we're staring at a new phenomenon that I have only read about and never really experienced as an adult, and that is stagflation. So I wanted to get your opinions on it, what your thoughts are, maybe debate or talk about what we might do as investors if we're in that environment or that environment might be coming. So stagflation. Wow, I never been through this.
So let's define it first.
Sure.
Define stagflation so we know what we're talking about.
So stagflation is that nasty phenomenon where you have a low growing economy, call it 1.5% GDP. So it is positive, hence it can't be a recession, right? Recession is defined as negative GDP 2 quarters in a row. But you also not only have slow growth, low growth, you have high inflation, call it north of 5%, right? It's kind of that combination. And the reason this is painful is because the Fed is kind of can't really go after it, because whatever they would do to defeat inflation would hurt this. And it's kind of an interesting puzzle to be in. So that's my kind of quick definition of stagflation.
And then, so the issue being the economy is not growing fast enough to make up for the erosion of money, because the rate of growth is slower than the rate of inflation.
Exactly.
Right.
Substantially, right?
Right.
A couple of factors, probably.
Because if you had a real recession, then you would beat inflation, because the definition you can't have it's contradiction in terms, right?
You can't have both.
A recession is deflationary, so you would solve the inflation problem, but you would create an unemployment problem.
Correct.
So, yeah, gosh, I mean, it's a thorny issue. But I think, I mean, so look, it depends, I think, on how you invest. Probably depends on where interest rates go, right?
Okay.
Because I think that if you have inflation, right, then that is going to lead to wage growth.
Correct.
Right? And if you have wage growth, then something you want to be doing is investing in real estate, right? Because you're going to have rent growth too. So, and if you've got inflation, you're also, frankly, I'm thinking this, like I'm sort of analyzing this as I'm talking about it, but as I'm talking about it,
I love it.
I'm actually realizing that, you know what, a stagflationary environment might not be a bad environment at all in which to invest in real estate, because of a couple of things. So if you do have some positive growth, and you do have inflation, that is going to translate into rent growth. It's also going to mean that the debt service on your property, which is your single biggest expense, is going to get cheaper in real terms over time. Because it is going to be inflated away. So you get basically a double, kind of a double bonus on this, right? Where you're going to be protected from inflation on the downside, and you're going to benefit from it on the upside, right? So, so that's what I would say. If you are in a stagflationary environment, look for real estate. As always, I think you probably want to look for higher quality real estate, just because there may be, in a stagflationary environment, who knows, maybe there's going to be more layoffs, coming and stuff like that from time to time. You want to have a better quality tenant base. But other than that, I would think as long as you've got growth and you've got a decent amount of inflation, you're probably going to want to be in something like real estate.
Yeah, when I think about this again, just going through this together, I think one of the things that will benefit is existing operators.
Well,
right?
Yeah.
Because your debt structure is kind of already put in place. And if you are in an environment with 30-year fixed rate debt, you're going to do really well. Residential, for example, a lot of stuff that I buy, right? You're like, good, cool. Got rates in the 4s or 3s or 5s or whatever they are. Doesn't matter, right? You know what that expense is. So,
I mean, listen, if you I always tell people that in real estate, time is your friend. Right?
Correct. Timing. Yeah.
And
Timing.
time is not just timing, but just time, right? If your time
Time.
horizon is long enough, you can pretty much survive anything, right?
Mhm.
As long as if you have a long-term hold strategy and you have long-term debt locked in place, you can pretty much work your way out of any problem, right?
Agreed.
And as long as you didn't over leverage, the issue is if you over leverage the property and then you have something that hits you on the rent side, right? So
Yes.
you can't make your debt service. But over leveraging property is not the same kind of problem that we had in, say, that before the great financial crisis, where people were able to leverage properties up to like 93%. We have talked about like IO, we've talked about some other things. Yeah, those are issues. Sometimes they're kind of additional leverage in disguise, right? But I think even with some of those debt strategies, say, if you're talking about bridge debt, that's 5 years. 5 years is a pretty long time horizon, right?
Yeah.
If you're paying interest only for 5 years, well, yeah, you're not getting any amortization, but you've got 5 years of rent growth. You've got, if you're smart and you kind of bank some of that additional profit as a hedge, right? Which you should maybe increase your reserves, just in case like something happens around the time that you have to refinance and have a little bit of extra capital put in if you need it. But after 5 years, you really shouldn't if you're getting rent growth and stuff. And in an inflationary environment, you should be getting rent growth. Not much of an issue, right? So I think that this you should be fine with with sort of a long-term hold strategy for real estate, and even some. But I think the short-term hold strategies are the ones where you
Exactly
potentially get just because you're timing the market, and the market is getting closer and closer to some kind of correction, and you might get caught on the wrong side. Most people will probably get in and out, and they'll be fine. But there's always going to be those people who get caught, when the tide goes out, and that's kind of what you gotta look out for. So those some of the flipping, some of the short-term hold strategies may be a little more.
Yeah, it's kind of exactly how I see it. There's a couple of things to just go back to. Yeah, time in the market beats timing the market, something I say pretty consistently. And again, I just want to go back and remind folks that Dave Ramsey, Mr. Don't Buy Real Estate, he was a flipper back in the day, and he actually built a portfolio that was worth $4 million. He had roughly $3 million in debt. So on paper, he was a millionaire. Unfortunately, he chose a debt structure that was 90-day in nature.
Wow.
Crazy. And the market turned and all his short-term debt came due, and he had to go, he lost it all. So again, watch the debt structure. And that's really what the Great Recession was all about. It was adjustable rate mortgages that reset in waves and became unaffordable. So it really is often a debt structure problem. So be careful.
Debt, I mean, debt is really the big risk factor that people don't take into account. Like if you go and you buy a property for 100% cash, right? Yeah, your returns are not going to be as high as if you leverage to get higher returns, but your risk is so much lower. Think about it. If you buy a property for 100% cash, if all your tenants leave, right? What are your expenses? You've got just property taxes, and you've got some minimal maintenance, right, on the property, and that's it. And you're not going to most likely lose the property because of that. However, if you're leveraged 75% and a quarter of your tenants, just a quarter of them leave, right?
Yeah.
You're not making your debt service, and the bank is going to take the property, and you've lost all your equity, right? And you've realized the loss of equity. See, this is important distinction. If you pay all cash and property values go down, you will have a paper loss, but you will not be out of pocket. You will not lose. You'll own the asset, right?
Correct.
You'll be able to own it through the downturn and back into the upswing, and you will make back your equity and then some, right? If you get caught with your pants down because you have debt on the property and you can't service the debt, the bank will take the property back, and you will realize that loss, right? You won't have the chance to go back. It'll be a real out-of-pocket loss. So
Exactly.
That's kind of like the danger of debt. So when people are talking about, juicing their returns with financial engineering, that usually involves more debt or something that's like debt, like preferred equity or something else, or mezz debt or what have you. Yeah, you may be juicing your returns, but you're also increasing the risk profile of the asset, and you are putting yourself in a position where less has to go wrong to lose your whole investment. So debt is a double-edged sword, right? And I think people really need to understand that. And if you were talking about Dave Ramsey, I mean, another famous example that maybe, example of a famous person that maybe a lot of people don't realize is Tony Robbins, right? Tony Robbins started out as a real estate guy, and he did that structure where it was like, buy a property, increase the equity, take out a loan, buy another property. And so he built, basically what he built was a house of cards. Right?
Absolutely.
And it was great he did this in the 80s, right? People forget about the real estate crash of the 80s, or a lot of people were too young to even remember it. You and I were teenagers, so I certainly remember it. It was a big thing in New York.
Oh yeah, I remember
last year. But it's great when things are rising, and every time you go to take a loan, that your property is assessed by the bank at a higher value, right? And then, but once it starts contracting, it all goes back in reverse really fast. And if you wound up losing everything because the economy turned and he couldn't service his debt and just had a cascade of foreclosures, right? So that's the problem. It's easy when the bubble is being blown up, but as soon as the bubble is pricked, the people who did riskier stuff are the ones who
get
burned.
Yeah. And then the last thing I want to talk about on the notion of stagflation is I think stagflation, and again, haven't lived through it, so this is an opinion, not certainty, but I think a stagflation will end with a nasty recession. At some point, the Federal Reserve will say, that's enough inflation. We've got to get down to 2%. We can't have this forever. It's hurting too many everyday Americans or Main Street. They will jack rates up. They will force demand destruction. Unemployment will go up, and the stagflation will be defeated, or inflation will be defeated. So no matter how long stagflation is, 1 year, 2 years, 2.5 years, I think it ultimately ends with a recessionary blow off. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's one scenario that makes sense. I think you could also wind up with a business cycle recession too, right? Where people, stuff just gets too expensive and they just stop buying.
Exactly. Yeah, it ends in a recession.
But I do think that what goes up must come down eventually, right? And I think a stagflationary environment, like let's sort of just turn this conversation back a little bit. Sure. I think people were able to tolerate ridiculous asset inflation because either they owned assets like a house and they're happy about it, or as you've pointed out many times, with low interest rates, payment affordability was still within the reach of a lot of people, right? So they weren't really feeling it as much. However, when it became like regular consumer good inflation, right, that's when people start to really feel it, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that's an unpleasant feeling for everybody when they just, every time you go to the supermarket, that ground beef costs, more, right? So, so I think that's when like the average people start screaming for something to be done, and the Fed has to do something about it, right? So,
and that is exactly topic number 3. We're going to talk about that in topic number 3.
Yes.
Before we get into that,
see how I segued into that?
I did. That was very nicely done. Before we get there, I want to give you an opportunity to tell people how they can follow you, because you put out amazing stuff.
Sure. There's a number of different ways that we can connect with each other. If you'd like to join my regular old mailing list and see deals and see information about my programs and stuff like that, you can go to multifamily launchpad, all one word, .org, and you'll see a free download there, which you can grab. If you simply put a / and then join after that same URL, you can also get information about my programs, my coaching programs in multifamily real estate. If you would like to join my free Facebook community, that is Multifamily Investment Community on Facebook, And finally, if you'd like to invest with me, the best way to do that is go to my website. Just Google Two Bridges Asset Management LLC, and there's an investor form you can fill out and you'll get on the list.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan.
Absolutely. Thank you.